Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for coming along to this session. This is the Open Government session on healing divided societies, and my name is Ruchir Shah. I head up the policy department at the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations. I'm also directing the Open Government Pioneers Initiative with partners across the UK, and I warmly welcome you to this discussion, which I think is very topical. This discussion is actually a repeat of a very similar kind of conversation we had in Paris at the Open Government Summit in December last year. And it was a smaller group there, but it was a fascinating conversation, and I think a very critical conversation given all the developments that we've seen take place over 2016 with what I would say is a fracturing of societies, increasing divisions in many countries across the world, political divisions, people mistrusting their governments, but I think most crucially, people mistrusting each other, and people increasingly talking to each other in tight circles of groups, cliques, bubbles, you name it, and with social media and lots of other technologies merely amplifying that. So we've got quite a task ahead of us over the next hour to try and see if there is any possibility that we might be able to heal some of these divisions. I don't think any of us would disagree that the times we're in are absolutely crazy right now, and it is quite scary, genuinely scary. But what I do have here is a quite strong panel, diverse panel of people who come from different perspectives on this issue, and we ought to bring different insights from across civil society, academia, and think tanks, and so on. So just so everybody's aware, we are live streaming this session. You'll see cameras at the back, so people will be watching this from around, we have advertised this quite widely, so there should be quite a few people watching this from around the UK as well, possibly internationally. And the other thing, just to be aware, is we want to make this session very interactive. So I'll be chairing the panel, but we've also got facilitators from DEMSOC, they can introduce themselves when they start, but they will be actually facilitating the audience interaction sessions and the group discussions. So hopefully that combination will work quite well. I'm going to introduce my panel now. To my left here, Amy Dalrymple is the head of policy at Alzheimer Scotland. If you were here during the gathering yesterday, you'll have seen her speak at the first session with the First Minister. And she's also the chair of SCVO, my organisation's policy committee. So very much in charge of the show, usually. So next to Amy, we have Claire Bynner. Is that how you say it, Bynner? And Claire Bynner works for the University of Glasgow, but she is a research associate with What Works Scotland, a very powerful initiative over the last couple of years, which is looking at improving public services in Scotland and learning from what works best in Scotland and across other countries as well. And then we have Kathryn Corrick, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Represent Me. She's a co-founder as well, and this is an organization that specializes in emerging technologies and how the use of technology and data is changing culture, society, law, and democracy. So a very powerful technological perspective on the conversation. And we also have Andy Williamson, who is, would it be correct to say that you're a recent, you've been recently sought refuge in Scotland?
One month.
Yes. So you've escaped to Scotland because you were so angry with the world, yeah?
Pretty much.
Seeking citizenship next.
Yeah.
And you're a managing partner of the Democratic Society, of which the facilitators are also working with. And you're also on the UK steering group for civil society, that's correct? Yeah? Great. So that's my panel. I'm going to ask now just my panel to say a few words for a couple of minutes each, just to give an opening remark on how your first initial thoughts and reactions to how we might be able to bridge those divides between citizens about the way the country is run and build that trust between citizens, not just between citizens and governments, but between citizens. Can open government, an open approach help there? Amy.
Thanks, Ruchir. I was really intrigued when Ruchir and Lucy, who's also somewhere around here, who's at SCVO too, raised this idea of open government as a way of fixing some of the cracks that have opened up, have opened up over many years, but have become increasingly apparent last year, I think. And we're seeing with the forthcoming elections in Europe as well. We'll see what resonate, kind of whether that's kind of going the same way. We've already seen in parts of Central Europe, in the UK, and in the States, and I don't think I need to go over that. I work with people with dementia, and my role in my day job is to make sure that people with dementia and carers of people with dementia are involved in and engaged with and participate in the decisions that affect their lives. And creating ways of doing that and exploring ways of doing that and constantly improving ways of doing that is a massively fulfilling and rewarding part of my job. And I think it has an impact on this open government issue, because what it's shown me is that when people feel ownership of what is happening, so I talk about policy, but it's a catch-all technical term. But when they feel ownership of decisions that are made, they feel that they understand why those decisions are made, because they have because they understand what's influenced that decision, and that they've been part of that decision making, and they know what the priorities are. When there's that understanding and that knowledge, there's this sense of ownership, there's this sense of connection with decision making, and this feeling, and this is what's crucial around the kind of healing divided societies theme, the feeling that we're all in this together, and that we may all have different constraints, and we may all have you know, kind of a different role, but that we're all trying to move towards the same thing. And while some of us might think it's going to take a very long time, and some of us are rather less patient, there's this sense of a shared direction, and that's what's gone. That's what we, you know, many of us working in jobs like mine in public policy thought we had, and have been brutally shown that we don't have. And opening up our structures and our decision-making structures, I think, to me, seems to be an important step in creating some of that healing then, so that people can feel part of a shared direction and part of decision-making.
Thanks very much, Amy. Claire.
Okay, hello, I'm Claire. I work for What Works Scotland, but actually I'm going to draw on a lot in what I talk about here on my PhD research, which was actually in a neighbourhood you might have heard of called Govan Hill in Glasgow. And Govan Hill's been described as a super diverse neighbourhood. So it's an area with people from extremely different backgrounds who are living in close proximity, where issues of trust and animosity come up every single day in people's daily interactions. And what I also want to reflect on is part of what Amy's spoken there about, which is this issue of ownership and control. If you think about it, the slogan that has won the most votes in the world at the moment is the slogan, "Take back control," okay? And what that tells me is that there's a real feeling within communities that people don't feel in control of the pace of change of what's happening around them. And certainly that was the case in my research in Govan Hill, where many of the issues were about that sense of powerlessness. Some of the issues that really underpinned a lot of the tension were to do with housing and to do with the conditions that people are living in, but that translated into their relationships with other people around them. So there's a really important, I think, message there about people being engaged and involved in the change that is happening around them. Very quickly, in terms of what works and dialogue, from my experience, there's a few things to bear in mind that worked well in Govan Hill. One is having a shared interest, a shared cause that brings people together. Sometimes we bring people around issues that are really rather remote from what actually they care about. So participating in activities, practical activities, be it cooking, music, gardening, cleanups, brings people together. But bringing people together isn't enough. You also have to facilitate dialogue with people, because if you just bring people together and don't have any dialogue about why you're doing what you're doing, you can actually almost end up with people being alongside each other and still not having any real connection to each other. So that's another point I think worth bearing in mind, importance of dialogue and communication, even in practical activities. especially across language divides. The other thing I found works really well in bringing people together in dialogue is a shared purpose, a shared vision, something that captures the imagination, and that campaigning spirit within people. The campaign might be to save the swimming pool, as it was in Govan Hill, or it might be to fight Trump. It could be whatever it is, but these things often bring people together from across divides. And finally, I would say that if we're really serious about tackling and healing divisions, this is difficult work. It involves difficult and uncomfortable conversations with people who you may profoundly disagree with. And we have to open our minds to the implications of that. And in the words of one practitioner that I've worked with, they said to me, it means sitting in the fire of difficult feelings and unresolved conflicts. So I'd like perhaps for us to reflect on sitting in the fire.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, I don't know how many of you have recently seen a Danish TV ad that's gone around Facebook. If not, brilliant, because I'm about to do an experiment. So, what the TV ad does is it has a bunch of Danes who've come together from all walks of life, and they don't really know each other. And what's asked of them, they're all in separate boxes. And they get asked some questions. So I'm going to test out some of the questions, and I'd just like you, rather than move into separate boxes, to put your hands up. I know, interaction, scary. So, are you ready? The first question. Who was the class clown? 2. The rest of you are really dull. So, who are step-parents? Oh, there we go, same chap. He was a class clown and step-parent. So, who is madly in love? Again, I want to... You're great. So, something for this side, maybe. Who feels lonely? Oh, wow.
Could we feel lonely at the gathering?
Not today.
Not today.
Not today.
So, the reason for these questions was that people, we have shared experiences, and we often have things that we agree on that we don't often recognise with each other. And it's a very, very powerful, I encourage you just to put, like I did, Danish TV humans Facebook or something that I searched for it this morning on Google. We often first start with the point of disagreement rather than the points of agreement. And that can be all sorts of different things. It could be politics. It could be that you just don't like the hedge that's kind of creeping into your garden. It could be so many different things. So it's kind of going back to what Claire was saying. And I was very interested with Brendan Cox and the picnic or sort of street parties that were announced yesterday in memory of Joe Cox. And what it's trying to do is bring people together over, again, those shared experiences, over food. I met 3 of the SCVO chaps last night for the first time ever. We shared food. We had wine. We discovered what we, our differences, but also what we shared. So it's sometimes finding those very small things first, rather than trying to sort out the world first. It's like, where do we agree? Where do we come? What makes us laugh? I don't know how many of you have seen the Dalai Lama and Bishop Desmond Tutu at all. I thoroughly recommend you just go and put those 2 names into Google, and you will find them just chuckling. These are 2 men who have seen apartheid, who have seen their faiths in different parts of the world challenged in different ways, and yet they laugh, they have forgiveness, they are such beautiful human beings, and they find what they share first and then figure out what the differences are. So those are my few thoughts.
Thank you. Andy has the final laugh.
I'm going to follow on from Kathryn, because Kathryn just described a really nice experience of meeting people and going out to dinner. I was invited to that dinner, but I was stuck on a plane flying from Brussels with a very manky sandwich and a rather uninspiring bar of chocolate. So, you see, even when there's a good experience with some parts of our community, others can be excluded for whatever reason. And we need to be careful that we don't ignore those reasons for exclusion. They can be all sorts of things. I'm going to shift the focus a bit because I agree with everything that's been said, but no one's mentioned this enormous elephant in the room, which is government. This is about open government. We talked about society and people and communities, but open government is a two-sided coin. I keep hearing people say, we've lost trust in government, we've lost faith in the process. They've lost faith in us. They don't trust us. Let's be clear about this. It's not a one-way street. We've broken down the relationship on both sides. So Scotland is surprisingly good on the trust factor with government, actually. It rates pretty highly. You guys are pretty lucky, and I think that partly is to do with the political environment and the nature of Scotland, the youth of the country, and the size. Small countries tend to be stronger democracies. Okay, one of my roles is I lead the open parliament process in Moldova, which is a small country and it's not a great democracy, but there are exceptions. What do we mean by open government? I get so sick of rolling up to an international conference to be told it's about data. It's not. It's just not. Data is just a tool. It's about actually trust and relationships and communication. It's about people. Ultimately, open government is about changing the internal culture of government and the external culture of all of us so that we recognise that there are less barriers, that the communication channels are open. It's about increasing transparency and visibility. So I, as a citizen, I say this, I did a speech in the French Senate in December, and the person before me was talking about the data that the French Senate is going to release, and I just said, that's not your data. That's mine. I'm a citizen. Every single piece of data that you in Parliament or government produce belongs to me. How dare you put conditions on my use of it? You have no right to do that. I have the moral high ground here. It's mine. Give it to me. And don't tell me how I can have it. Give it to me in a way I can use it. Because I want my communities to be empowered. Now, open government to me means empowering the conversation between government and communities, but also empowering communities to be able to use that data and become more informed and educated about how to solve the problems in those communities. So this is about closing the loop. This is a big ecosystem, which starts with cultural change, not technology. It's about connecting people up. It's about building dialogue and debate. Ultimately, this is a trust process. And it's about listening. And stop telling government it should listen and start listening as a community as well. Because again, when we go out saying, oh, politicians don't listen, government doesn't listen, we're not listening to them either. And the sitting in the fire, I think, is a really important metaphor. This is hard stuff. You build trust by dealing with the difficult stuff. So you have to be prepared to disagree and actually respect that disagreement. And we all have to be, on all sides, prepared to move our positions. Because if all we do is create a massive flow of data and information and we still lock horns and sit in these ivory towers with our rigid positions, we've achieved nothing. So this is about breaking down barriers, communicating, building trust. So that's where I come to open government.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, panel.
Anyone? Just raise your hand. Oh, okay. Yeah, go for it. Okay, you next.
Yeah, I'm Kevin Hutchins from Langstone Housing Association. You're talking about bridging divides. Have you any ideas as to how to deal with economic inequality? Because very often that actually excludes people from housing, which I'm particularly interested in as a board member of Langstone Housing Association.
Any more questions?
Ooh, that way.
Feel free to make a comment as well if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm not very good at this.
Just even following on for the last comment or question there, where did you get the evidence that Scotland's such a good democracy? That wasn't a joke.
Is there any more? Three. Yeah. Hi, thank you. What we were talking about was really about how do you actually get these two sides or more than multiple sides of this divided society to actually come together in the first place, that actually you're the voices that we're hearing and not necessarily the people that you want to. How do you actually get people in the same room to communicate? Are there economic barriers? Are the only people who were necessarily interested in politics actually the ones who are coming in and sitting down and talking about it, and not actually the people who are affected by the day-to-day and the voices we're hearing, and not necessarily the voices of the masses.
Thank you. I know there's one more over here. Is there anyone else that would like to ask or say anything? Yeah, are you happy to take this one as well, just now?
Yep.
Or would you, yeah.
I mean, I think from our group, one of the things we were concerned about was, you know, are there places or mechanisms for even playing fields that everybody can, all the players and stakeholders can talk at? And one thing I was just going to throw in is I didn't manage to mention at the table there was the thing play standard, which Scottish Government I've been working with NHS on, and it's quite useful because one of the questions in it is about, you know, your feeling of identity and ability and confidence to raise your own opinions in it. And so the very fact that that's brought to the table and part of the discussions would be important, because quite often it's an assumed thing, wrongly.
Okay, well, there's some really strong questions, themes coming out around economic inequality, economic barriers, evening the playing field, confidence, and you know, the extent to which we are confident about our own democracy here. I mean, I suppose I would like to just add another bit into the mix here, which I think would help with when we go through the panel for answering it, and would also help with the time as well, which is if you could also maybe bring any kind of perspectives you have that might touch on technology, how we might use technology within this to address some of these concerns, how we might enhance scrutiny and accountability at the same time. So, you know, feel free to pick what you would like to answer. I'm going to ask Amy to start, and then we'll go through the panel.
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me this time. I was just commenting to Ruchir that I'm not as good. I won't talk as much about the technology stuff because I see it as a really, really useful tool in terms of information, and I'm a little wary of it in terms of engagement. I think it's really good for kind of continuing engagement, but for beginning and ending engagement, I don't think it. I think we need to be careful about it. I think that people being in the same room and being and seeing each other and recognizing each other as fellow human beings is really important, actually. Which brings to the question about how do you get people into the same room and how do you create these level spaces, which I really like the idea of a kind of level space. I don't know. Forever, all I do know from my experience, not just in this current role, is that you only do it by listening to what's relevant to people. We're assuming that very question assumes that people aren't in the same room and that we're facilitators. So going to where people already are, rather than trying to get them to come into our room, if you see what I mean, is something that I've found quite helpful over the years. So going to pubs, going to youth groups, going to school gates as a campaigner for various issues, I think is I think is really important. Sorry, Claire just put my Siri on, so it was recording it, and Siri was about to answer the question for all of us. That's right. So yeah, I'll let the other members of the panel, but I can come back to those things if that's helpful.
If you move on next to Siri, I mean Claire.
So sorry, I thought that was my phone. The questions. I think on the economic inequality one, I think perhaps what we need to focus on is that it is an issue of economic inequality, because at times like now we're going to have a lot of scapegoating and a lot of blaming on other people. So even naming the issue as this isn't, this issue of housing is not because they are undeserving and they are deserving. This issue of housing is because actually we're in a period of austerity. There is not enough housing for people, there are not enough housing options, and we've got private renting and very deregulation of housing. So it's naming what it is and bringing that up the political agenda on that one for me. The second one on people coming together in the same room to communicate and getting them in the room, I think this is a really significant issue. The issue of loneliness and isolation, and I think that is tied into the use of technology. So what I've seen is that what we need to be concerned about is the people we don't see, that we don't reach, because People have a lot of emotions and they're venting them on social media and they're venting them in these echo chambers and situations, and they are becoming isolated and lonely. And there is research around Facebook and depression. So I think it's recognising the scale of the problem. It's not that people aren't communicating and coming together, but they're doing it in a new way, and they're doing it in these forums through social media that can then be create new negativities, yeah? And then what government tries to do is set up another Facebook to counter the negativity of the community Facebook. Again, there are lots of issues around that for me of whether that's going to work. But I don't have immediate answer to that, but I think we need to work with people who are isolated and lonely. And on the place standard, absolutely, I think there's huge potential for the place standard as a tool, absolutely great, but what it relies on is quality facilitation. You've got skilled facilitators here in the room, highly skilled piece of work, often not recognised enough in doing any of this type of work. So I think we need to recognise the need for those skills.
And I've just seen a tweet that apparently Shetland Council are combining the place standard and participatory budgeting in the coming months, something to watch out for. So thank you for whoever contributed that.
So I run a social network.
There are good examples as well. There are good examples.
No, I say that slightly just to... so represent.me is all about trying to bring people together and also understand where people are agreeing as well as what they may disagree about. We ask questions, it's like polling and voting, and we make that data aggregated, available so that it can be shared in real time. Now there's lots of things that I can talk about in this, but I think that some of the stuff that's come out here is around confidence and also shared spaces. We've just run some work with an organisation called weareundivided.co.uk, and they've been running, they're wanting the voices of under 30s to be heard around Brexit. And I've just done all the analysis for what's happened there. We had 5,500 people get involved, and the way that it worked is that anyone could state their demand and then they could vote on other people's demands. So it was all driven, all the content was driven by young people rather than someone else dictating what the question should be. And some of the research that the analysis was that more women participated who'd said that their gender than men. And often online, it's not that way around, particularly around politics. We actually had double the amount of women participate than men. And often, you'll be pleased to know, ladies, that you're more progressive. And you tend to be a little bit more, well, at least of the sample that we had, they tended to be more pro-European and also more sort of thinking about the consequences of different actions. It was quite interesting. It also spread across the UK nations quite evenly too. So Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland and England were fairly proportionally, almost to a plus or minus 1% represented. And so I guess my point in that, and going back to the confidence in spaces, is that one of the things we try and do with how we're doing our work is go exactly what Claire and Amy were saying, is going to where people are. So we don't try and make people come to our website. We create technologies that mean you can put things wherever other people are. So whether it's on a forum or on another website or whatever. And I think that's really, really important. The other aspect that we noticed as well with men who were coming along, often you get some comments and trolling, and that can put other people off. So it's trying to create mechanisms for which people can participate in a way that they're comfortable and still get involved and grow with confidence, rather than have really, really high expectations for what you're doing, whether it be online or in the room. I ran a number of years ago, I guess a very open consultation on Digital Britain, but it wasn't, I didn't put it as the word consultation. I didn't think that's what we were doing at the time,
We just said, hey, this thing has come out. We think you'll have an opinion about it. We know how clever you all are, and this is how you can get involved. And we set a very simple framework. And one of the things that I recognised was that most people don't like writing things down. They like meeting with other people. They like talking about it, and they like someone else to be responsible for writing this stuff down. So it's sometimes just recognising it's not that people don't want to come together, but what it is that they don't like doing. They often just don't like putting their name to a particular set of words or a particular set of actions. And so growing confidence that way, and small bit by bit, you actually change what people feel confident in doing.
Thanks very much. Andy?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the Scotland is a good democracy. I don't think I said it's a good democracy. I said it's better than some others, and it's more
Moldova,
trusted.
I think.
It's certainly better than Moldova. There is academic research that shows the levels of trust in government and parliament is higher in Scotland. So it tends to be over about 50% in Scotland. In the UK, it's about mid-20s. In the US, it's 17%, although that might have changed recently. And just to give you a real benchmark, Serbia is 7%. So actually, those of us north of the wall do trust our politicians more than those south of the wall. That doesn't mean they're good. It just means they're a bit better than the other ones. I think there's a long way to go.
It means we know them better. It means we know them better than they are.
The place standard, that really annoys me. This really, really, really annoys me. It's in a place standard. Why isn't it in the national curriculum? Why isn't having the confidence and the ability to take part in debate and conversation a core part of our national education? It should be. And it shouldn't just be lip service of, you can do a lesson on it once a week. We should be teaching this from the age of whenever you can think about it. We should be teaching people to debate right from the start. And it's got to be inherent. One of the biggest problems we've got with democratic engagement throughout the Western world, I once said this at the UN and the Chinese told me off because they teach political literacy. I handled that quite well. I didn't really respond. We don't really teach politics and political literacy. We don't teach what democracy is. We don't teach people how a bill goes through Parliament, whether it's Holyrood or Westminster or Brussels. We don't teach people where law comes from. We don't teach people how to get involved in changing it. We don't teach people how to take control of their own lives and realise that they have rights and powers. When your local council consults you, you have a legal right that guarantees the strength of that consultation is effective. I would say, without doing the research in any detail, with pretty much good certainty, every single local authority in Scotland is breaking the law when it comes to the effective involvement of citizens in its decision-making process. That's how bad it is. And what's worse, if that isn't bad enough, is we let them get away with it because we don't know. And we don't do anything about it. So that brings me on to the sort of economic inequality. And I've been racking my brains how to answer this question. And I'm just going to answer it off the top of my head how I feel about it. We have no income inequality in the UK. We have plenty of income. It's the distribution of it that's unequal. There is no problem with income. We could solve all our problems tomorrow if our system wasn't so fundamentally corrupt. It could be fixed quite easily. The challenge is how do we change the political system to make it so that those that hold wealth and power no longer do. I can't think of another way to answer that question. We don't have austerity in the UK. We have enforced austerity for political ends. We don't need it. We don't have to have it. We have been given it because there are political motivations for doing it. Same with inequality. It suits those with money and power to keep those that don't have it where they are. That can all be fixed. So if we think open government is going to fix that, no it isn't, because that will not change the fundamental structures of power. It will rebalance some of the conversations at the micro level.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you to my panel, Amy, Claire, Kathryn, and Andy. I'm just going to go back to you for another 10 minutes. But just before I do that, Doreen, you have 1 minute to give us a Scottish Government perspective.
Thank you for that. to answer every single question on behalf of government. I head up open government within Scottish Government. And do I think it can work? I don't think it can answer every question now, but the reason I am absolutely sure and putting my energy behind open government is really quite simple. It's really quite simple. I'll probably break people's ears because I speak too loud anyway. Open government is a deal between the citizen and civil society and the state to look at the really important things that we all care about in terms of openness, transparency and citizen participation. And if we can, within that umbrella, find ways of having some of these conversations, find mechanisms, whether they're place standard, whether they're democratic spaces, whether they're means and mechanisms of having those conversations. And for people in public service to learn how to do that, it doesn't come naturally necessarily. For us all to learn to be good citizens. It's a mechanism that I am absolutely behind, and it is no accident that this came from the financial crash, that this is about trust. The whole of the invention of the Open Government Partnership happened because of the financial crash and the recognition that trust in government and institutions fell off a cliff. It is a deal that each country looks at the priorities for that country. But it's a race to the top. There's no particular sanctions. But for us, Scotland has been accepted as a pioneer. We're working directly internationally with the Open Government Partnership. So throughout this year, we have a way of thinking about what open government can do for us at every level and in ways that suit us. But my answer is yes.
Thank you, Doreen.
Firstly, I just want to thank those that aren't in the room who are listening on live stream. And if you'd like to get in contact with us after this session, then you can get in touch with us at OpenGovScot on Twitter. And you can also join the forum, opengovernment.org.uk. I've just pulled up this website. This is something that SCVO have been working on with our partners around the global goals. Global goals is an initiative that was launched by the UN in 2015. 193 countries around the world have signed up to the global goals. There's 17 goals, which you can see on this website here, ranging from poverty to hunger to health and well-being, all the way through to partnership working. And at SCVO, we believe that the global goals are really a framework in which we can achieve huge change, huge societal change in Scotland. And actually, we need to see this as something that we can use in Scotland to drive that change and not just on kind of the international development side of things. So we've set up this website with our partners to really seek contributions from Scotland's third sector. It's a crowdsourcing site. We want people to contribute to this site by going on to globalgoals.scot and contributing your stories about your work that you're doing in civil society in terms of reaching these global goals. So you can click on here on the link at the top, contribute. You can submit your story and you can go through the form and really what we want to do is use this as a platform to not only show within Scotland what the third sector are achieving to achieve the global goals, but also to show the rest of the world. And I was talking to a really interesting group yesterday who are running the TIE campaign around LGBT inclusive education. And they really see that their campaign isn't just about Scotland, but it's about impacting on the rest of the world. And as civil society, in those other countries where maybe LGBT inclusion isn't something that can be discussed freely within government, this is an opportunity to say, well, Scotland is leading the world in this area, our civil society is leading the world, and you can talk to us and we're here to support your efforts. So please get in touch with us after this event. I know I've tried to cover that quite quickly, but we really would like your contributions to the Global Goals site. It's not moderated unless anything really bad goes up. So please just feel free to upload your stories and they'll be up there straight away for the whole world to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, panel, and thank you, facilitators. I'm going to go straight now to my colleague, Lucy McTurney, who's the Deputy Chief Executive of SCVO, and she's also chairs the project board for the Open Government Civil Society initiative, of which this event is part.
Very, very briefly, everyone, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Ruchir and Paul and to the panel, to our facilitators, but to all of you for being part of what I think is an incredibly important and incredibly timely conversation that we're having here. We're in a room, in the gathering. We've been gathering as the third sector in this building for 13 years now. And the very defining thing about a charity, a voluntary organisation, a third sector organisation, is it's about bringing people together to be more than the sum of their parts. It's the arithmetic that says 2 + 2 = 5. We can do things together that we can not do on our own. And I think in that sense, we sometimes take this issue about connections, combating loneliness, bringing people together, facilitating conversations, just a little bit for granted. We just do it, we get on with it, but we don't talk about it as a thing in its own right. And for me, that's what's really important about the Open Government Partnership, is it's giving us a space and a framework to be out and proud about people who make it our business to connect people with other people, to be the 2 + 2 = 5 equation. And that's what you've been doing today. I hope it's what you'll continue to do in your work, but also to continue to be part of this conversation with all of us as we move forward over this critical year. Doreen's told you about the 1 year opportunity we have to be in the spotlight as part of this conversation in a global sense. We really want to make the absolute most of it and use it as leverage on the institutions, on government, on the politicians and the officials to change the culture and the way that they behave. So let's make the most of the year that we have ahead. And good luck to all of you in all your parts in doing that. And thank you for coming along today.